how many of you have heard of the quadratic formula by a show of hands? Oh, I thought it was just going to be Elijah. Okay. So Elijah told me I'm going to go with 95% of the quadratic formula. Maybe if I show it to you, you'll remember. Are you ready? Oh, Mr. Garza, why don't you sing it to us? No? You can sing it? Okay, go ahead.
I'm not singing it, but I could.
Okay.
It's like, all right, it goes like, it's like, I'm trying to remember, hold up. It's like x equals negative b plus or minus the square root, something, 4ac all over 2. And,
there you go.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
There's a song for it. It's Pop Goes the Weasel. So x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. It's a hefty formula, but I'm going to give you some things that I think might make you happy in the end. We'll see. Donuts. Okay, so first of all, first and foremost, in order to use the quadratic formula, your equation must be in standard form, and it must be set equal to 0. So in order to use the quadratic formula, it must be in standard form and must be set equal to 0. When else did we have something in standard form set equal to 0? What did we use other than, in this case, quadratic formula? When it was in standard form set equal to 0, what of your 3 ways could you use? Factoring. Okay? Because I told you at the beginning, I'm going to show you multiple ways to solve quadratic equations. So we've done factoring, we've done taking square roots, completing the square and quadratic formula. You can choose any method ultimately that you want to solve. Sometimes some won't work. Sometimes others work better. Some are quicker, some take a little bit longer. Okay, but you can choose any method and eventually we'll get to that point. Now the quadratic formula always works. Doesn't matter what the problem is. As long as you can write it in standard form and set it equal to 0, it will work 100% of the time. Factoring, completing the square, and taking square roots, not so much. Okay, they work, but not 100% of the time. So if you have no idea how to solve an equation, you're like, I don't even know where to start, I don't remember anything she taught me, remember the quadratic formula. Okay, it will always, always, always work. Now, who can tell me what standard form is? What's our general standard form? Elijah.
Ax squared plus bx equals c.
Okay, ax squared plus bx plus c. So that's our standard form, ax squared plus bx plus c. Remember where a is the number in front of your x squared term, b is the number in front of your x or your single variable, and c is your constant. Okay, and that's the form it needs to be in. If you can identify a, b, and c, do you think you can plug it in this and simplify? Yeah, right? So let's just kind of get to it. Ready? Here we go. So let's look at 2x squared plus 3x minus 5 equals 0. So before I start plugging stuff in, what do you think my very first step should be? Identify your A, B, and C. Those are the things that I need for the formula. So what is A? 2. What is B? 3. What is C? Okay, step 1, identify your A, B, and C. We did that for factoring, right? And in some cases we did it for completing the square, so we knew what we needed. But identify your A, B, and C. At this point, it literally is just plugging it in. Okay, so we're going to plug in all the pieces, and then we'll work through simplifying. Again, this involves steps. You're going to have to write stuff down. But I promise if you write things down and you take your time, there's no reason for you to get this wrong if you know what the formula is. All right. So x equals, the formula says negative b, so I'm going to plug in b, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times C all over 2 times A. Okay, so at this point, all I have done is plug everything in. I'm not simplifying in my head. I'm not using my mental math. I'm plugging it in so I don't mess anything up. So far, so good? Okay, so let's simplify. So I have -3 plus or minus. I'm going to simplify what's underneath the radical. 3 squared is 9. So -3 plus or minus the square root of 9. And then I need to multiply this out. So -4 times -2, I'm sorry, -4 times 2 is -8. -8 times -5 is a positive 40. Okay, I'm not going to add that yet. I'm going to keep simplifying. And eventually when you're good at it, you'll be able to do a little bit more. But for now, we're going to write steps out. And then I need to simplify the denominator. So 2 times 2 gives me 4. Okay, so all I did was simplify 3 squared, and I multiplied this out. You need to make sure you understand that this is a -4. People mess up on their signs because they don't take this as a -4. Okay, so it's -4 times +2 times -5. Super important. Okay, let's keep simplifying. So -3 plus or minus the square root of what? 49? All over 4? Can I simplify the square root? What's the square root of 49? 7. So -3. Do you notice how my plus and minus is already built in for me? So I don't have to worry about that. The square root of 49 is 7 all over 4. Still okay? Okay. Now, I'm going to pose a question to you. So listen to my entire question before you answer. Actually, I want you to think about the answer before you say anything out loud. Do you think we are going to have 2 physical answers or 1 answer with a plus or minus? So in your brain, think, am I going to have 2 physical answers or am I going to have 1 answer with a plus or minus? Everyone think they have an answer? Yeah? Oh, no. Okay, so let's think back to completing the square. When did we have 2 physical answers? When what happened? When you can't simplify the square root? When you simplified the square root and there was no square root left, right? So when there's no square root, we were able to break our answer into 2 and have 2 physical answers. When I had a square root, that's when I kept the plus or minus. It works the same way for quadratic formula. So how many answers am I going to have? Well, 2, but 2 physical or 2 together? They're going to be 2 separate answers because look what happens. -3 plus 7 over 4 and -3 minus 7 over 4.
And don't be lazy. That is where people, you do all that work and then you miss the answer because you get lazy on that step right there.
Yep.
Don't do it. I've seen it year after year after year.
After year after year. Okay, so we have 2 physical answers because there is no square roots. We're going to break that into 2, just like we did with completing the square. The difference here is we have a fraction that we have to simplify. So let's simplify it. -3 plus 7 is 4, and 4 divided by 4 is 1. So x equals 1. -3 minus 7 is -10. And -10 over 4 does not go in nicely. So I'm going to leave it as a fraction, but what do I have to do? Divide by 2 and reduce. So x equals -5/2. Because if you divide by 2, so x equals 1 and x equals -5/2. So yes, there are a lot of steps to this problem. But every single time, if you follow those steps, you know the formula, and you take your time, there's no reason you should get any of these problems wrong. Just like completing the square, it literally is the exact same thing over and over and over and over again with different numbers. Okay? All right, let's do another one together, and then I'll let you try one. So let's look at x squared minus 2x minus 4 equals 0. Okay, what was step 1? Identify A, B, and C. What's A? 1. What's B? And C? Okay. So x equals negative b. What is b? Okay, so in the formula, there's a negative, and b is already negative. So I'm going to write it in like this. If you want to write positive 2 right now, that's fine. But that's technically what it is. I have the negative from the formula, and b is negative. Okay? Plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c. How come what? Okay, I'm writing out all the steps. Some of you, again, maybe saw that that was positive already. Okay, so let's keep going.
Actually, I think it was the opposite. She was looking and wanted to bring it down to -2 versus leaving the negative. So I think that's good you wrote it out.
Oh.
Because that can get confusing.
Yes. So you have to watch your positives and negatives, and you also need to make sure you know what is positive and negative in the actual formula. Okay, so this, oops, you can't see that. This negative, one more time, I brought down, and then my b was negative, which is why I'm writing it like that. Okay, so x equals, a negative times a negative is a positive, so that becomes a positive 2. Plus or minus the square root. Now here is some of the issues I saw with completing the square. What is negative 2 squared? Positive 4. Okay, that is a positive 4. And then we have negative 4 times 1, okay, which is negative 4, and negative 4 times negative 4 is a positive 16, all over 2. Do you need me to re-explain something?
Versus the first two, versus 2 plus minus, it turns into a positive.
Here?
Yes.
Yeah, so because it was a negative as part of the equation, and my b was negative, that negative and a negative became the positive. Okay? So if I keep going, 2 plus or minus, what do I have underneath the square root now? 4 plus 16 is 20 all over 2. So now we're at the step where I have to simplify the square root. Is 20 a perfect square? So what's my option? Factor tree. So what two numbers multiply to 20? 2 and 10, and then 2 and 5. I have a pair of 2's. So x equals 2 plus or minus. That pair of 2's comes out. The 5 stays inside, all over 2. And we're literally practicing this like the entire week, okay? Because we're going to be real good at it. Everyone okay up to that point? Now, with fractions, we should always reduce them. Now, here's where you need to either make a note to yourself or be very careful. Do you see that I have a 2, a 2, and a 2? Okay. I can reduce all of them because I'm reducing each of the terms. So I want you to just look up here and not do anything. I can technically write this as 2 over 2 plus or minus 2 square root of 5 over 2. Okay, I can break it up into two different fractions so it's not one big one. Okay, again, I don't want you to write anything because I'm going to show you.
Pay attention to what she's saying, don't miss this.
Now, 2 over 2 becomes a 1, right? And this 2 over 2 becomes a 1, so I really just have plus or minus the square root of 5. Okay, this is my final answer. When you're at this point, I'm not asking you to break this up, but what's really important is this denominator has to be able to go into both of the numerators. Like all three of them have to simplify for you to be able to simplify. So 2 goes into itself once, 2 goes into itself once, 2 goes into itself once, leaving me with 1 plus or minus the square root of 5. Okay, so I'm not asking you to break it up, but if it's helpful to you, then you should. Because there will be times where, say this number here is 5 square root of 5. So if it's 2 plus or minus 5 square root of 5 over 2, I cannot simplify it because 2 doesn't go into all of those numbers. Do you understand what I'm saying when I say that? Yeah? Okay, so go ahead and simplify this fraction and write your answer as 1 plus or minus the square root of 5. And actually the next one we're going to work on kind of ties all of that in. Okay, so here's what I would like you to do with this problem. I want you to identify your A, B, and C. I want you to plug it in. I want you to get as far as humanly possible. Whether it's by yourself or with your group, we'll walk around and help, but get as far as you possibly can. So I think we're all noticing the same thing. So we're able to identify, we're able to plug in. It's that very last step of simplifying that's messing everybody up a little bit. Here we go. So, step 1, identify A, B, and C. You need to make sure, because I saw this on a couple papers, you need to make sure that your B is a negative 8. Okay, B is negative 8. So when I go to plug it in the formula, I have X equals negative, that's part of the formula, and then B, which is a negative 8. No. Okay, so do you have to write negative 8? No. If you see that it's a positive 8, that's fine. Okay, hold on.
-8 and then I square rooted and I still got positive. Like when I put it in like inside the B.
But it's not in the radical right now. So then yes, you need to. So you're getting lucky with your positives and negatives, but okay. This should be a negative times the negative 8 because the formula says negative and then B. And B is negative. So it's two negatives next to each other. So do you have to write this? No. If you know B is negative, it's going to be a positive. Okay? So that's up to you. But for now, I would write some of these out. Plus or minus. Okay, guys. Plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4 times A times C all over 2 times A. So I'm going to simplify. That negative and a negative become a positive 8 plus or minus the square root of negative 8 squared is a positive 64. Negative 4 times 2 is negative 8. Negative 8 times 7 is what? Okay, negative 56. All over 4. X equals 8 plus or minus 64 minus 56. What'd you get? 8. And again, as I walked around, I saw everyone get to this part. I even saw you simplify this radical. Okay, so X equals 8 plus or minus 2 square root of 2 over 4. Here is where we had some questions. Okay, so it's like the other problem. These three numbers are what you're looking at. You cannot simplify the radical anymore. Okay, so if this 4 is not in a radical, you can't divide it by that 2. So you're just looking at those three numbers. What number goes into 8, 2, and 4? 2. So 2 goes into 8 4 times. 2 goes into itself once. 2 goes into 4 twice. I still have a fraction, and that's okay. My answer is 4 plus or minus. I can write this 1 if I want to, but I don't have to. So 1 square root of 2 over 2, or you can write it without the 1. Either way, it's fine. But you cannot do anything else to that problem. Okay? So you cannot do anything else. This is just going to take some practice, I think, and seeing all the different things that we're going to get. So